A Muslim man burned the image of the Virgin Mary on live TV. Seconds later, the studio went silent. Hello, viewer. Thank you for being here. Leave a like and tell us in the comments what you thought about the story and from which city you're watching us. Now, let's continue with the story. There are moments in life when a single action, done in arrogance and anger, sends a shockwave through an entire nation. And that night in New York City, inside a brightly lit television studio, one such moment unfolded before millions of Americans. Omar Rahman, a well-known Muslim media personality celebrated for his sharp skepticism toward Christianity, walked onto the set expecting another routine debate. Producers whispered excitedly behind the cameras. They knew Omar was unpredictable, confrontational, and good for ratings. But even they had no idea what he had brought with him. Across from M sat a Catholic priest with gentle eyes, unaware that the discussion about faith was about to turn into something far darker. As the host introduced the topic, miracles in modern America, Omar reached into his canvas bag with a slow, deliberate motion. The audience leaned forward. The host hesitated. The priest stiffened slightly, sensing something was wrong. Omar pulled out a framed image of the Virgin Mary, her blue mantle glowing softly under the studio lights. A collective gasp filled the room. This, Omar said, holding it up toward the cameras, is what millions pray to. Tonight we'll see if anything divine happens. Before anyone could process his words, Omar flicked open a metal lighter. A bright flame burst upward, and with a cold smirk, he pressed the fire to the bottom corner of the holy image. The paper crackled, color melted into black. Within seconds, the image of the Virgin Mary was engulfed in flames. Omar laughed, but the laugh didn't last. Because exactly 10 seconds after the fire touched the holy image, the studio went silent. Not normal silence. A heavy, suffocating, impossible silence. The host froze mid-breath. The priest bowed his head as if sensing a presence. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows. Even the cameras seemed to hum and dim, as if reacting to something unseen. Every person in that studio felt it. They were no longer alone. And in that breathless, supernatural silence, the miracle had already begun. Long before the flames touched the holy image, before the studio lights flickered, before the impossible silence fell across millions of screens, there was just a boy named Omar Rahman, growing up in a place where two worlds collided every single day. Omar's childhood unfolded in Dearborn, Michigan, a city where the call to prayer echoed from mosques, yet Christmas lights glowed on nearly every suburban street. His parents, immigrants who worked long hours in small businesses, did everything they could to preserve the faith and traditions of their homeland. Inside their modest apartment, Arabic prayers drifted through the hallways, and his mother hung verses from the Quran along the living room walls. But outside their door, America was a different universe. At school, Omar's classmates brought candy canes in December and talked excitedly about Christmas miracles, angels, and Virgin Mary. Teachers organized holiday plays where children dressed as shepherds and wise men. Omar watched from a distance, confused by how normal these Christian stories felt to everyone else. At home, his father dismissed it all. Son, they have their beliefs. We have ours. Don't mix the two. But children notice things. Adults pretend not to see. And Omar noticed everything. He noticed how peacefully his Christian neighbors lived, how they prayed in a way that felt personal, intimate, almost gentle. He noticed how some carried small rosaries in their pockets. He noticed statues of Virgin Mary, placed in front yards, hands open in a welcoming gesture. To Omar, they were strange, yet strangely beautiful. Still, he learned early that admiration was forbidden, so he hid his curiosity. And curiosity, when buried, often grows into rebellion. By high school, Omar had become the kid who questioned everything. His family's traditions, his classmates' beliefs, even the idea of God acting in the world. He pushed boundaries, tested limits, and used his sharp mind like a weapon. When he discovered debate club, his teachers realized he had a gift. Omar didn't just argue, he dismantled. In college, majoring in communications, that gift propelled him straight into radio, then television. America loved his confidence, his fire, his boldness. But beneath all that noise, beneath the sarcasm and the smirks, there lived a boy who once stared at a statue of the Virgin Mary and wondered why her eyes looked so full of love. A love that one day would come crashing into his life in a way he never expected. By the time Omar reached young adulthood, the quiet curiosity of his childhood had twisted into something far sharper. Growing up between two belief systems, one inherited, one observed, had left cracks in his heart that no one in his family ever saw. And through those cracks, frustration began to pour in. It started in high school cafeterias, where debates over religion and culture broke out like wildfire. Omar discovered that whenever he challenged a belief, any belief, people listened. Some got angry, others admired him, but either way, he had their attention, and attention quickly became his fuel. By college, that spark had grown into a blaze. Omar majored in communications, and professors quickly noticed he had a natural instinct for confrontation. He didn't just argue, he dissected. He didn't just question, he cornered. While other students spoke emotionally, Omar spoke surgically, cold, precise, impossible to ignore. Christian classmates became his favorite opponents. They'd gather in late-night study lounges, Bibles and laptops open, ready to defend their faith. Omar walked in like a storm. Virgin Mary? Miracles? Intercession? He scoffed. Show me one piece of evidence. Some nights the debates lasted for hours, but two things always remained the same. Omar never ran out of words, and his heart never felt any fuller. When he wasn't arguing, he was consuming atheistic content books, podcasts, documentaries, dismantling miracles and disproving faith. It shaped each I.M., hardened him, convinced him he was the only one brave enough to reject ancient stories. Then came the moment that changed everything for his career. A local radio station invited him to speak about faith in modern America. They needed a bold Muslim voice who could challenge Christian narratives. Omar didn't hesitate, and once he spoke into a microphone, he never wanted to stop. His wit, his cutting tone, his ability to embarrass pastors and Christian callers' audiences ate it up. Soon, bigger stations invited him, then television producers came calling. Overnight, Omar Rahman became the Muslim skeptic America couldn't stop watching. But fame has a way of hiding fractures. Behind the bright studio lights and viral clips, Omar was lonelier than ever. The applause felt hollow. His victories in debate tasted bitter. And without realizing it, he began directing most of his hostility toward one figure in particular, the Virgin Mary. The woman whose eyes he once admired and now resented without understanding why. His rebellion wasn't just against Christianity, it was against something deeper, something that was already reaching for him from beyond the noise. For all the noise Omar created on television, his nights were terrifyingly quiet, and that was when the dreams began. The first one was so subtle he dismissed it immediately. He dreamed he was standing in an empty field at dusk. No buildings, no voices, just wind brushing against his coat. At the center of the field stood a woman dressed in a blue mantle, her posture calm, her presence unmistakably gentle. She didn't speak, she didn't move. She simply looked at him. Her eyes weren't the stern eyes of judgment he expected. They were sad, deeply, heartbreakingly sad. Omar woke up with a jolt, breathless, brushing his hand against his forehead as if to wipe the dream away. Just stress, he muttered. But then the second dream came. This time, he wasn't in a field. He was in a dimly lit room, a candle flickering in the corner. The woman in blue stood beside him, close enough that he could see the texture of her mantle, the softness of her expression. He tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come. She lifted her hands slightly, not to silence him, but as a mother would when comforting a frightened child. Her lips moved, but he heard the words inside rather than through sound. "Why do you wound the one who loves you?" He woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing. This time, the excuse just stress didn't come as easily. The dreams grew more frequent. Some were only flashes. Her silhouette, her hands folded in prayer, the faint fragrance of lilies in the air. Others were vivid. In one, she stood at the edge of a storm, holding out her hand to him. In another, she walked through a dark hallway where doors slammed shut behind him until only her light remained. Strangest of all was the emotion that lingered each morning. Not fear, but longing. A longing he didn't understand and didn't want to admit. During the day, Omar doubled down on his skepticism. He spoke louder, argued harder, mocked the Virgin Mary more aggressively than before. The angrier he became, the clearer the dreams grew. as if the very woman he denied was gently stepping closer. Omar didn't realize it then, but these dreams were not coincidences. They were invitations. Virgin Mary was already reaching for him, quietly, patiently, the way a mother calls home, the child who has wandered too far. As the dreams intensified, something inside Omar began to fracture. Instead of softening, he hardened. The gentleness he encountered in sleep only made him more furious when he woke. He didn't know how to process compassion, especially from a figure he spent years mocking, and guilt, an emotion he refused to acknowledge, started twisting itself into anger. That anger needed a target, and Omar chose Virgin Mary. Producers at a major New York network noticed his rising popularity. Americans love to fight, and Omar delivered every time, so they invited him to appear on a prime-time special called Faith in Modern America. It was the biggest platform of his career. It was also the moment he lost control. During a briefing meeting, one producer leaned in with a smirk. "You're our wild card, Omar. Give the audience something they'll never forget." The suggestion wasn't direct, but the implication was clear. Shock them. Push the line. Break something sacred. Omar went home that night, pacing across his apartment floor. Something dark whispered to him, prove them wrong. Prove yourself right. Destroy what they love. Whether it was pride, confusion, or the echo of the dreams he tried to bury, he couldn't tell. What he could feel was pressure building inside him, like a storm. And so he made a decision. A reckless, irreversible one. The next morning, Omar walked into a small Catholic gift shop in Manhattan. Bells rang softly as he stepped inside. Shelves were lined with rosaries, candles, statues, and images of the Virgin Mary. He felt out of place, but he scanned quickly and grabbed a framed picture of Mary in her iconic blue mantle. The elderly shopkeeper looked at him kindly. "For a gift?" he asked. Omar hesitated barely a second, but the pause betrayed him. "Something like that," he muttered, avoiding the man's eyes. As he paid, the shopkeeper added softly, "She is a mother. Treat her gently." Omar clenched his jaw and walked out without responding. Back in his apartment that night, he rehearsed the moment in the mirror. He would pull out the image, hold it to the camera, light it, and watch believers crumble. He told himself it was bravery. He told himself it was truth. But deep inside, something felt wrong, terribly wrong. Still, the decision was made. On live national television, Omar Rahman would burn the image of the Virgin Mary, and destiny was already waiting for him on the other side of that flame. The night of the broadcast felt electric from the moment Omar stepped into the studio. Producers were rushing, technicians adjusting cables, the audience buzzing with anticipation. The entire set of Faith in Modern America gleamed under bright lights, ready for confrontation. Omar walked backstage carrying his leather bag, the bag where he hid the framed image of the Virgin Mary. Every step echoed. Every heartbeat felt heavier than the last. And though he wouldn't admit it, a cold uneasiness crept up his spine, as if something unseen was watching. The host greeted him with a firm shake. "Ready to make America talk tonight?" he joked. Omar smirked. "Always." Across from him sat Father Andrew, a middle-aged Catholic priest with calm eyes, hands folded gently in his lap. He studied Omar quietly, not with hostility, but with a sadness Omar couldn't understand. It irritated him more than any argument. The cameras rolled. The red light blinked. And America tuned in. The opening debate was fiery. Omar attacked Christian concepts, dismissed miracles, mocked intercession. "You really believe the Virgin Mary hears prayers?" he pressed. "She is not divine. She is a symbol, nothing more." The audience reacted, some nodding, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Father Andrew responded with patience. "Mary is a mother who leads people to her Son. Her role is love, not competition with God." His gentleness only fueled Omar's desire to humiliate. Then the host opened the floor for final statements. This was it. Omar reached into his bag. The room tensed. Even the host leaned back, sensing something wrong. With a deliberate motion, Omar pulled out the framed image of the Virgin Mary and held it up toward the main camera. Gasps erupted. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Father Andrew closed his eyes as if praying. "This," Omar declared, "is what millions believe in. Let's see what happens when truth meets tradition." He pulled out the lighter. The tiny flame burst alive, bright, defiant, merciless. Omar pressed it to the bottom corner of the image. The paper caught instantly. Blue mantle curling, gold accents turning black. Virgin Mary's face disappearing behind smoke. Omar smiled, a forced, hollow smile. He expected outrage. He expected arguments. He expected noise. But in the next few seconds, the very seconds that would change his life forever, nothing happened. Nothing except the sudden, unnatural, suffocating silence that swept across the entire studio. The silence of a presence no one could see, but everyone could feel. The moment the flames swallowed the soft blue of the Virgin Mary's mantle, something in the studio shifted subtly at first, like a breath being held. Omar didn't notice it. Immediately, he was still watching the picture burn, still feeding on the shock painted across the audience's faces. But then, the sound vanished. Not lowered, not muffled, vanished. It was as if someone had ripped the audio cables out of reality itself. The hum of the cameras gone, the whispers of the audience gone, the host's half-spoken words cut off mid-syllable. A silence so unnatural, so thick, filled the room that even those who didn't believe in anything spiritual felt their chests tighten. The lights flickered overhead once, twice casting long, trembling shadows across the stage. One of the overhead spotlights dimmed abruptly, as though bowing to something unseen. A cameraman dropped his headset. The clatter should have echoed through the studio, but no sound followed. It was silence beyond silence. A silence that felt alive. Omar stood frozen, lighter still in hand, though the flame had gone out. His smirk faded. His throat tightened. He tried to speak, to joke, to taunt, to recover the moment, but no words came out. It was as though the air itself refused to carry his voice. Father Andrew bowed his head slightly, not shocked, but reverent, as if he recognized a presence no one else could name. The audience looked around, wide-eyed. Some clutched their chests. One woman began to weep silently, tears sliding down her face despite the absence of sound. And then Omar felt it, a weight, a gravity, settling over him, not threatening, not angry, but heartbreakingly sad. He looked down at the burning image lying on the floor. Through the smoke and curling edges, he could still see her eyes. The Virgin Mary's eyes, painted, yet suddenly more vivid than anything else in the room. They weren't eyes of wrath. They were eyes of a mother whose child had wandered far, far away. A shiver traveled through Omar's spine. For the first time in years, he felt small, exposed, known. And as the final ember of the holy image died out, the silence deepened, pressing into every soul present, whispering a message no microphone could ever capture. She is here. When the broadcast finally cut to an emergency commercial break, chaos erupted behind the cameras. Crew members whispered frantically. The host paced in circles, demanding an explanation from technicians who had none. Father Andrew quietly traced the sign of the cross, his face pale but peaceful. And Omar felt like the world had tilted beneath his feet. He tried to speak to the producer, but his voice trembled. He blamed the silence on a technical glitch, yet even as he said the words, he saw disbelief in everyone's eyes, including his own. When he stepped out of the studio into the cold New York night, the air hit him like a wall. His knees weakened. He gripped the railing outside the building, breathing hard, trying to shake off the sensation that someone or something was still watching him. He went home by taxi, sitting in the back seat like a man who had just witnessed something he couldn't explain. The city lights blurred through the window, as though New York itself had softened around him. Every time he blinked, he saw them again. Those eyes, the Virgin Mary's eyes. Sad, alive, knowing. By the time he reached his apartment, the video clip had already gone viral. News outlets replayed the moment again and again. Muslim man burns Virgin Mary, image studio falls silent. Social media exploded with theories. Sabotage, coincidence, divine judgment, stage stunt. But none of that mattered to Omar, because he hadn't imagined the silence. He hadn't imagined the weight in the air. And he certainly hadn't imagined the sorrow in her painted eyes. He sat alone in his living room, lights off, hands shaking. For the first time in years, he felt fear, not fear of consequences or public backlash, but fear of something deeper. What if he had provoked a reality he didn't understand? He opened his bag to hide the remains of the burned image, only to find something else. A small rosary, tangled among the papers. Not his. Not something he remembered picking up. He held it up. The beads glimmered faintly in the dim light. Omar should have thrown it away. Instead, he froze, unable to let it go, unable to touch it with disrespect, unable to understand why it felt heavier than it looked. Outside his window, sirens wailed, horns honked, New York roared as usual. But inside Omar's apartment, the terrifying silence from the studio had followed him home. The night after the broadcast should have been filled with interviews, headlines, and celebration for Omar. Instead, it was filled with something far more unsettling: dreams that refused to let him go. He fell asleep exhausted, still clutching the mysterious rosary he'd found in his bag. And almost immediately, the darkness lifted into a soft, bluish glow. There she was again, the woman from his previous dreams, standing just a few feet away, wrapped in the same blue mantle, her face illuminated by a light that didn't come from any earthly source. But this time, the dream felt different, sharper, closer, real. The Virgin Mary didn't speak at first. She simply looked at him, with eyes full of the same sorrow he saw on the burning image. Her presence wasn't frightening. It was overwhelming in its gentleness. Omar found himself unable to move, unable to breathe, as if her gaze had reached a place inside him he had spent years trying to seal shut. Finally, she whispered, not in his ears, but straight into his heart, "I am praying for you." Omar shot up in bed, drenched in sweat, chest tight, as if the dream had pressed a hand against his soul. He turned on every light in the apartment, pacing back and forth, trying to rationalize what had just happened. "I'm losing my mind," he whispered to himself. But even he didn't believe that. Because dreams weren't supposed to feel like that. Dreams weren't supposed to carry warmth. Dreams weren't supposed to leave you with the smell of lilies still lingering in the air. Over the next few days, the dreams continued, each one more vivid than the last. Sometimes she stood beside him in silence. Sometimes she reached out her hand. Once, she walked through a corridor of darkness, guiding him toward a distant light. And with every dream, Omar's defenses weakened. Curiosity, dangerous, forbidden curiosity, began creeping in. He found himself searching online late into the night. Who is Virgin Mary to Christians? Marian apparitions real? Why do Catholics pray the rosary? For the first time, he wasn't researching to mock, but he was searching to understand. One evening, unable to ignore the pull any longer, Omar walked to a small Catholic church near his apartment. He didn't go inside. He simply stood on the sidewalk, watching people enter with rosaries in their hands, faces peaceful, purposeful, and in that moment, he felt it again. The same presence from the dreams, quiet but unmistakable. Virgin Mary was still calling, and Omar's heart was beginning to answer. In the days that followed, Omar lived in two worlds, one loud, familiar, and rational, the other quiet, persistent, and terrifyingly real. By day, he tried to return to the man America knew, the sharp-tongued Muslim skeptic who dismantled Christian beliefs on television. But every insult he threw at the Virgin Mary echoed strangely inside him now, as if the words no longer belonged to him. His jokes felt hollow. His arguments, once so effortless, now wavered with hesitation he couldn't hide. By night, the dreams continued, and though they came softly, they carved deep. Sometimes the Virgin Mary simply stood beside him, her presence warm like sunlight through a window. Sometimes she whispered words he couldn't fully remember, upon waking words that left him feeling exposed, seen, and somehow cared for. Omar found himself avoiding debates, skipping meetings, ignoring calls from producers. His co-workers assumed he was overwhelmed by the backlash from burning the sacred image, but the truth was more unsettling. He was afraid of the silence from the studio, the silence in his apartment, the silence inside his heart that he had drowned for years. One evening, after hours of pacing his living room, Omar felt a sudden urge, an inner nudge he couldn't explain. He grabbed his coat and walked out into the cold night. Somehow, without planning it, his feet led him back to the same small Catholic church he had stood outside before. This time, he stepped inside. Warm candlelight flickered across wooden pews. A handful of people prayed quietly, and near the altar stood Father Andrew, the same priest from the television debate, arranging votive candles with gentle care. When he looked up and saw Omar, there was no shock, no judgment, only a calm recognition, as if he'd been expecting him. Omar froze. His throat tightened. I don't know why I'm here, he said, voice cracking. Father Andrew smiled softly. People rarely do at first. Omar sank onto a pew, the weight of everything pressing down. The dreams, the silence, the burning image, the eyes of the Virgin Mary. Finally, he whispered, "Something happened that night on TV. I don't understand it. I don't understand her." Father Andrew sat beside him. "She understands you," he said gently, "and she's been praying for you long before you ever said her name." For the first time, Omar didn't argue. For the first time, he let the silence sit without fighting it, and somewhere deep within, a door long sealed began to open. Weeks passed, and Omar tried desperately to pretend nothing was changing. He told himself the dreams would stop, the silence would fade, his heart would harden again. But the Virgin Mary had already planted something inside him, something small yet unyielding. And life was about to shatter the last piece of his resistance. It happened on a cold, rain-soaked afternoon. Omar was driving on the interstate, heading toward a quiet meeting with Father Andrew, something he told no one about. The sky was heavy, roads slick, wipers struggling to keep up. His mind swirled with questions he still feared to ask aloud. As he merged into the middle lane, a massive delivery truck swerved, tires screeching across wet pavement. Omar barely had time to react. Metal slammed into metal. Glass exploded. The world spun violently once, twice, 3 times before the car smashed into a guardrail with a force that should have broken him in half. Then everything went black. In the darkness, a soft blue light appeared. Familiar, comforting, impossibly peaceful. The Virgin Mary stood before him, her mantle flowing like water, her eyes filled not with sorrow this time, but with protection. She lifted her hand toward him, and though she didn't speak, Omar felt the words as clearly as if they'd been whispered into his soul. "You are not alone." He woke to the sound of distant sirens and voices calling his name. Paramedics pried open the crushed door. One looked at him in disbelief. "How are you conscious?" Another shook his head. "With this kind of wreck, he shouldn't even be breathing." Omar blinked, tasting blood, feeling pain, but not the kind of pain the mangled steel around him suggested. At the hospital, doctors confirmed the impossible. No internal injuries, no spinal damage, just bruises, cuts, and a fractured arm. "You're lucky," a nurse said. "No," another corrected softly. "He's blessed." When Omar was finally alone in his hospital room, he reached for the rosary on the bedside table, placed there by Father Andrew, who had rushed over the moment he heard. Omar closed his eyes, tears slipping down his face. Because he knew the truth he had been fighting for so long. The Virgin Mary had saved his life. The same mother whose image he had burned now sheltered him beneath her mantle. And for the first time, Omar whispered, not in defiance, but in surrender, "Help me understand." Recovery from the accident should have been slow, painful, and heavy. Instead, Omar felt something different rising within man, something he had never known before. Peace, a quiet, steady peace. It followed him home. It echoed in his sleep. It wrapped itself around every unanswered question in his heart. One evening, with his injured arm cradled in a sling, Omar returned to the church. Father Andrew met him at the door, not with questions, but with the warm familiarity of someone welcoming a son home. "I think I'm ready," Omar whispered. Father Andrew smiled gently. "She's been ready for you for a long time." Over the next few weeks, Omar met with the priest in small sessions, reading scripture, learning about Jesus, understanding the role of the Virgin Mary not as a barrier, but as a mother leading her children toward her son. The more he learned, the clearer everything became. The silence in the studio, the dreams, the accident, the survival that defied every medical explanation. It was all a road long, winding, painful leading him to this moment. On a quiet Saturday evening, inside a small chapel lit only by candles, Omar stepped forward. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from a profound sense of finally being seen and finally belonging. As the baptismal water touched his forehead, he felt something leave him: anger, pride, the weight of years spent fighting a God he never fully understood. And something new took its place. He chose the name Daniel, a sign of courage and renewal. For the first time, he prayed, not out of fear, not out of doubt, but out of love. And when he whispered, "Virgin Mary, thank you," tears streamed down his face. In the months that followed, Daniel began sharing his testimony in small parish gatherings, then at retreats, then in online videos that reached thousands across America. People who once feared him now embraced him. He told them the truth. That night on TV wasn't punishment. It was a wake-up call. The silence wasn't empty. It was her presence. The Virgin Mary didn't abandon me when I burned her image. She came closer. Today, Daniel walks with confidence, not the loud, hollow confidence of his old life, but the steady strength of a man who was found, healed, and transformed. And as he speaks to viewers across the country, he ends every testimony with a simple invitation. If this story touched you, leave a like, share your city in the comments, and subscribe to Touched by Mary. You never know. Your miracle may already be on its way.